So I got myself into a bit of a panic preparing for this talk. And I had a talk half written for you. I had slides created. And I worked myself up into such a fit of nerves. And it was only 2 days ago that I realized what was happening. And interestingly enough, it's related to the exact thing that I'm talking about, which is sex. Essentially, I started having performance anxiety. I mean, actually. And what I realized 2 days ago was that if I tried to go through with the half-written script that I had prepared for you, and the slides and the shiny presentation around this particular subject, I would be perpetuating something in our relationship with sex that is the very problem that I want to speak to. So I am standing here a little shaky and pretty vulnerable without a plan and without a script. And anytime I talk about sex, I understand that there is no way for me to write a talk about that. I talk about sex almost more than I talk about anything in my life. It's what I do for a living. And it's never the same talk, and neither is sex, is never the same experience. So we are going to find our way through this talk together. I have no idea what's going to come out of my mouth. But in order to give this talk, I knew that I had to see your faces and stand in front of you. That I couldn't give a talk to a generic room or a blank wall or people as if I was practicing, because that's not actually what's needed, and that wasn't going to draw out of me what I needed to say and what was needed to be heard. So here we are, in the moment of intimacy and vulnerability in that. I want to talk to you today about the issue of sexual assault and the crisis we're facing on our college campuses around sexual assault. And carve a road so that we understand that that is a crisis that has a lot to do with us sitting in this room. That is not something that's just happening over there, but that it's actually something happening here. And it's something that matters to all of us because at the end of the day, we are all standing inside of the bodies that we are living in. And it is these bodies that engage in sex. So I want to invite you right now as you sit in this room to just take a second and stop and feel your body. I have an idea to share with you, but more than an idea, what I want is for you to feel something in your body. Because that's where sex happens, is in these extraordinary bodies that we live in, with everything that's happening in them. I also had like a moment of personal crisis backstage as I'm getting ready to do this, which is like, what shoes do I wear? I did my makeup. I started having an allergic reaction. Take my makeup off. My bra straps are falling out. How do I keep my bra straps in? I forgot my thing at the hotel that does that. You know? That we have this idea when it comes to sex that we can't actually just be who we are, which is very, very human. 2 years ago, I need a little sip of water. Someone already drank out of this. How do you know that? There's like 7 bottles up here. Thank you. See, we need each other. We so need each other. So 2 years ago, almost exactly to this day, I was invited to a campus to give a lecture about sex on a campus in Colorado, because that's what I do for a living. I give the sex education that I never got, and you likely didn't either. And when I got to this campus, I was very, very touched by the experience I had of students after this lecture who came to me to tell me stories about their sexual experience. And there was one woman in particular who came to tell me a story. And I didn't realize that her story 3 days ago would become my teacher for how I needed to show up at this talk. And what she came up to me and she said, every time I get close to having sex, I freak out. I get nervous. I get anxious. I start shaking. I don't know what to do. How do I make my anxiety go away? There's this guy, see, and we're texting back and forth, and we've never really met, we haven't really spoken, but I think it's gonna happen. And I said, what do you think is gonna happen? And she said, I think we're about to have sex. I think we're gonna have sex tomorrow. And it sounds like anecdotal as I'm saying it, but she was in so much pain. She was frozen in her anxiety about this encounter. And I looked at her and I said, did you ever wonder if your anxiety wasn't a problem? If your anxiety was actually trying to tell you something that was important for you to listen to? That maybe moving from texting to sex with someone you'd essentially never met wasn't the right thing, wasn't exactly like what came next in the equation. And she broke down and she started crying and she said, no one has ever in my life told me that I could trust myself, that I could trust my body, or that I could trust my emotions, ever. And this is a girl that's walking around campus every single day, feeling paralyzed and a tape running in her mind of how do I just get my anxiety to go away, when her anxiety is the best thing she's got going for her, that's trying to give her information about what wants to happen. So I wanted to find out what was happening on campuses across the country. And I decided to go to schools all around the country and speak to as many colleges as I could. And I learned something really surprising, which was that we were having a very important conversation about sex on campus, about trying to solve the issues of the sexual culture on campus, but no one was talking about sex. What we were talking about was policy and handbooks and reporting procedures and consent language and freshman orientation. And at the end of the day, these didn't translate to students naked in a bedroom with all their vulnerability and their emotions and their bodies and their desire and their questions and insecurities. It didn't mean anything to them. The big word right now in sex education, especially on college campuses, is consent. And this is a very important concept. So consent is essentially the agreement to engage in sexual activity all the way through that sexuality, all the way through that sexual exchange. But what it doesn't talk about is where we actually begin to understand consent, which is in the body. This is where we get our yes and our no. And that ultimately, teaching about consent and stopping there without any conversation about what actually is happening in the sexual realm was like handing a pair of goggles to someone who doesn't know how to swim and saying, here's a pair of goggles. Have a good time. Enjoy the ocean. Water's warm. And they're thinking, I don't even know how to swim. What is in the ocean? What is sex? That we have this paradigm set up that we are working against sexual assault, that we are fighting rape culture with legislation and with policy, and all of those are essential. But what we're not doing is offering a paradigm for students to understand the possibility of what sex actually can be. And they are lost. They are falling through the cracks. And what they come to encounter when they're in a room is their vulnerability and their insecurity and their questions and their bodies as they are. And if we've never given them a paradigm for sex that includes emotion, that includes a connection to whatever the body is trying to tell us, then when they get there, they begin to think there is a very big problem happening. That the very fact that they're having emotions at all is a problem. That they're feeling shy, that they're feeling nervous, that they're feeling insecure. We are nervous inside of sex because it's vulnerable and it's intimate. And it's the same vulnerability I feel coming out here to give this talk and look you in the eye. It's that same shaking, quaking intimacy of having an exchange that means something. And when they step into that room to have sex, they think that everything that's actually happening is a problem, and they'll do whatever they can to make it go away. How much alcohol do I have to drink? How silent do I have to become? How fast do I have to make it through this to get it over with, to do the thing that I think I'm supposed to do, which is sex? As if it's this thing with this prescription and this equation, as if A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. When we do that in the sexual realm, we fall asleep in our senses and in our hearts in a way that is so painful to us. We begin to think that there's something wrong with us for feeling the things that we're actually feeling. And we do all kinds of things to get out of that. A young man who came to a lecture of mine on the East Coast, after a workshop, he said to me, if the standard is just don't rape someone and don't get raped, that is a very low standard for college campuses and people as a whole. Why isn't the standard make this sexual experience as good as possible? And that is where we come in, is that we come in this equation in a hugely raw encounter of our own relationship to our bodies and to our sexuality. We cannot pass something on to our young people that we don't embody ourselves. That one thing that I always hear stories about people, like, when your parents tried to talk to you about sex, or the awkward sex conversation. What's awkward about that is the fact that we're trying to pretend it's not awkward. That starts making things incredibly awkward. And what I love about working with college students and young people in general is that they have a BS meter that is through the roof. They know when they aren't being told the truth, but they don't always recognize in the moment what's going on. They just think something here is off. And I don't know what, but I don't think I can really listen to you. I don't think this is the whole picture. We walk around with a belief in the sexual realm that there's something we're supposed to know about sex, and we're the only person who doesn't know that thing. That there's something that we're missing. And the reality is that we are all walking around feeling like we are the only person who's supposed to know this thing and missing this particular thing. And the cost of that is we walk around thinking that there's something wrong with me. That when it comes to sex, I can show up vulnerably over here or over here. I can tell the truth over here. But you want me to tell the truth in sex? About my vulnerability, about my nervousness, about my shyness, about what my body's actually telling me right now, about how fast it actually feels good to go in this moment. We're beginning to lose our young people because they can tell that we aren't telling the truth. And that's what has to do with every single one of us. How we show up in everything, in one thing, is how we show up in everything. What is it that we are seeking when we come to sex? What is that at its core? We are seeking for a kind of connection and a kind of intimacy and a reflection of our own wholeness. That is what is at the core movement of the sexual impulse, of desire. I believe in the power of sex as a possibility of healing, as a possibility to give us something and be a sphere of our being and our reality that helps us feel more of ourselves and not less than. We have 20 million students on college campuses right now who are swimming in an atmosphere of working to fight rape culture. If we want to solve the problem of rape culture, we have to replace it with the real thing. We have to give them something that feels real to them in their bones. They are curious. They want to know. How do we equip young people with values such as how to explore, how to navigate in the unknown, how to be with what's actually coming up for them without thinking that their job is to pretend it's not happening for them? How do we stand in front of them and look them in the eye and give them an example of what an open heart and truth-telling actually looks like? One thing that I see on campuses is that the way that we are starting to address this is something that we're losing them because they're starting to roll their eyes, they're starting to think it's hokey, and that it doesn't have to do with them. I had a psychologist from college reach out to me a couple months ago, and she said, even with our consent education, our assault numbers are not going down because I think students feel like it has nothing to do with them. We come in, we bring people in to do a skit about consent, a skit on stage that feels like a performance. And students walk away feeling like, that was a great performance, but I don't know what to do with that. Here's an online test for you to take. Click through. What is yes? What is no? That doesn't make any sense to a student who is in such the edge of their own exploration of their bodies. How do we make it so that we aren't teaching a sexual paradigm that is perpetuating shame or pressure? We're caught between these two rivers that don't allow us to actually show up as we are. I almost don't know where to go from here. And that's exactly what happens in sex, is that we hit a point and we don't know where we are and we don't know where to go. But we're just there. How do we begin to teach our young people to stand in the unknown and feel like they can stand there with whatever's coming up for them? They have to look us in the eye and know that we are doing that. We are on the edge of what I think is one of the biggest sexual revolutions that we have ever seen in this country. There is a voice around the pain of our sexual culture that is rising to the surface. And this is a revolution that will come from the inside, and it starts with us. Thank you very much.